Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Divulgence. Today, I'm super happy to bring on a new friend of mine that I'm sure you guys have seen. Recently, I've been doing some episodes with him and Exertus and the crew that we've kind of put together there. But I'm very happy to have on Divulgence today from American Time Machine, my new friend, Kurt. Kurt, what's going on, my friend? How are you today?
Great, thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome, my friend. You're so welcome. Yeah, it was great meeting you through Exertus, and we have a lot of fun, and we always kind of have a lot of interesting ideas and stuff to chat about. So I just thought, hey, let's keep the ball rolling. Let's keep those conversations open. So we were just talking about in the pre-show. I don't know. I know I kind of cut you off there, but we were talking about art and kind of different perceptions and lifestyles in art, but do you remember where you kind of wanted to pick things off, Kurt?
Oh yeah, totally.
Awesome,
Yeah.
go for it.
Initially, we were talking about music and having potentially a double life if you don't want it to mess with your personal relationships. And then we springboarded there into talking about art and valid forms of art. And I think you were talking about a lot more simpler forms of art potentially. Like there's some things that it seems like wishy-washy. I think a lot of people said that about Jackson Pollock, and
Sure.
yeah. So you still could say those things about Jackson Pollock, but I think there's a dynamic there of like, okay, he did something, and the premise is like, there's no way what I'm doing can ever be replicated by another human being because I was just at a certain point in the universe. If I do like thrashing motions of my brush strokes or little drippy ones, there's an element there that's totally random that can never be replicated, but like I was the force behind it, so therefore it is unique. So you could say that is a great argument for validation of what an art form is, but maybe why, if someone scoffs about that and says, oh, that's just garbage, what's the other side of the coin there? The other side of the coin is there, like, no, like the point of art isn't the fame behind it, and it just because you as a person invalidate that. I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about
Sure.
the frames of minds here. If you invalidate that unique moment in time that a person took out of their day or life to do this, you're not invalidating their art, you're invalidating your own ability to do something and appreciate it for what it is. That kind of ties in what we were talking about. I think that's a little bit more of an Eastern perspective, which I think is important to look at and evaluate. How much is my displeasure towards things, especially maybe art, how is that influenced just by the indoctrination that I've gone through ever since birth? It doesn't matter if it's Eastern or Western indoctrination. I think if we're indoctrinated into these structures, it gives us, especially in America, everything is framed in the language of competition. And I don't think that's completely healthy all the time. Like,
Totally agree, man.
yeah,
Totally agree. I totally
yeah.
agree that it's not healthy either. Sorry to cut you off, but I totally
Yeah.
agree with both of those.
So I think that has inadvertently, that's transitioned into the art world. And the nice part about the art world is like you have all your movements, and you could say part of it cannot be controlled. But the other aspect of it is I don't think most of our citizens really grasp arts in general. And when it comes to the cases, like if your child, for example, puts all of his effort into something and drawing something and you put it on your fridge, why is that an invalid art form? Why is that somehow less valuable to you? Let's say theoretically your parent. Would you say like this isn't as valuable to me as the Mona Lisa? You could say like that's when you get into a really interesting conversation, at least, of like, oh, how do I redefine what I'm thinking of? What is art? And I don't think most people have come up with even a sort of basis for having any sort of relative definition of what they considered art. They haven't taken an active process in trying to direct their minds into having an appreciation for art. They've been the consumer, never the director, if that makes sense. So
That's
yeah, I think that's only that mindset is nothing. it only reinforces, I think, what people like Jackson Pollock were doing in a way, and that's the glorious, amazing thing, even about like visual art, is like no matter, it just adds to the overall sphere of how many movements they were, and they all can be interesting and appreciated in their own way. Me personally, just because I think realism is boring and completely overrated. Your realism is only a product of a competitive Western society, and that's why like we place overemphasis on realism. For sure. I think even in the school system, they'll go over other movements, but I think they'll by and large encourage realism for the most part when it comes to artistic influence. So it's worth questioning everything every now and again. From that does tie in, I think, to what we were talking about. We were talking about Eastern religions. I don't know that much about Hinduism per se. I know a little bit more now about Buddhism. I haven't read the the holy book is the Tikitana. Is how you say it? I
I'm
forget.
not sure, man. I'm
Yeah.
not sure. Honestly, when it comes to religion, I've just accepted that I need to learn about it because everyone else practices it. But from my point of view, enough said. Let's just say enough said.
Canada's pretty secular. I get it. Like I was raised, so now
Sure, me too. Yeah, me too.
yeah.
Yeah.
If I like, my parents were more conservative. It was like church every Sunday type of thing. Then like when I got out of college, I felt like I went through. Well, now in hindsight, I feel like I went through my atheist period, but in retrospect, it was like you can't, if the church has failed in building an accurate representation or a good form or way to explain the concept of God, then you might not be rebelling against what God actually is. You're just rebelling against that crappy version you've been exposed to. So
Sure.
that's one thing like I kind of had to grapple with. And society, I think, is encouraging us to be slowly more atheistic. And I think that's tied into the Enlightenment and where things have gone scientifically. We're giving so much weight to scientific authority now, but really all of it has philosophical underpinnings. And I I think you have to recognize the limitations of objectivity in science and the weaknesses of consensus, and then that can transfer into having a more being open to the idea of a philosophical concept of God. That I think that's a much different way of interpreting it than we have been told a lot of the time. So one thing that got me more interested in Buddhism recently, I've always been, kind of intrigued by it, but I read a little bit more thanks to a show that's called The Midnight Gospel, and I like it a lot. And I don't want to do like a nerdy plug for it, but
Is that Duncan Trussell's Midnight Gospel?
it's a cartoon
Or
show on Netflix right now. I don't
okay,
know the creator.
I
I
think
should
that's
know it for
Duncan.
how many times I've watched it, like 3 times over now.
Okay, I think that's Duncan Trussell. Okay.
Yeah, it's the same animator that did Adventure Time, I believe. I never saw Adventure Time, but really goofy style. It's a weird way of like melding a really goofy, eccentric
Yeah, Midnight
animation
Gospel. Yeah.
style. Yeah, animation style with actually really deep and like cool concepts.
Well, Duncan he's pretty out there. So, are you
Yeah.
familiar with him? Yeah, he's pretty out there. So,
Well, I heard him. Is he the one responsible for Adventure Time?
I didn't know I didn't know he did that one too.
Well, someone involved was involved with both.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, it was really. I loved the show. I loved it pretty much from start to beginning, and I loved how I felt like it kind of put you in a trance-like state because all the conversations were just like they had a cadence to them. They were cool, and you really felt the person behind the microphone in all the conversations. So
Okay.
and I learned so much from that show. I could talk. There's value in each episode in its own way. Like there's an episode where they talk essentially have a huge long conversation about magic, and magic not just in a general concept, but Magick and Aleister Crowley. And that was a really interesting episode. The guy, I don't want to summarize it because it takes too long to summarize it.
Jesus, they have freaking Damien Eccles on the show.
Yeah, they
Do
had
you know
Dr.
who that
Drew.
is? Jesus.
No.
Right. He's one of the West Memphis 3 murderers.
Huh.
Holy shit. Anyway,
That might be...
sorry to cut you off. Oh, but I see Dr. Drew there too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that might be the Aleister Crowley episode, because the guy talks about how he was
probably
in prison.
Okay.
And
Joey Diaz is on there too. Okay, cool.
All right. I didn't recognize his voice, but that's really cool.
He plays Chuck Charles, Steve, and various characters.
Huh. Well, he might do different voices for it too. I can't remember. But yeah, the Dr. Drew one was really good. He's basically like the meditation guru in that episode. I never watched Dr. Drew much outside of that. I just know he was like famous for being on shows. Like a better version of Dr. Phil, a more accredited version of Dr. Phil. So yeah, the episode that really, like, I watched it over and over again because I felt like it meant a lot to me. But the episode was called The Annihilation of Joy. And the whole episode, he mentions the Borda loop. And what I get from, well, the Borda loop might be a form of reincarnation, I guess. That's how he describes it. I tried reading up a little bit more on it, but it seems like one of those more like fringe concepts, although Borda is for sure mentioned in Buddhism. He gets launched off into a simulated space. It's weird because I guess the universes like exist, but they call it a simulation. But he gets launched into them, and he gets launched into this one. And where he gets launched is like an intergalactic prison, and they call it a soul prison. And all of the inhabitants there bit out their own tongues just out of pure existential angst. So he meets this guy. Well, it's not a guy. He's attached to a prisoner, and attached to the prisoner is someone like on a string, and it's not a person, it's a bird. So I'll call it, but he talks like a person, so I'll call him, the bird.
All right. Just to be clear.
Yeah, he's on a soul string. The bird is attached to the prisoner, and Clancy is the main character. He gets basically almost like attached to the bird. Like he's a separate object, but he gets attached to the bird. And the bird gets to like explain to him what's going on throughout this entire episode. And so what they're doing, they're attached to one of the soul prisoners, and he is angry because everybody's angry. It's like this brutal prison, and he keeps getting the opportunity to essentially go on a prison riot and try to escape the prison. So he does it, and he dies. There's a bunch of brutality. He murders like 7 people, and he dies too. And nobody escapes the prison. So the first time that he dies, there's like these gods, these entities that see his body, and they like cut his sternum open, and they pull out his heart. And the heart comes out like super pissed. It has eyeballs. It's angry. It's like pulsating. And they put it on a scale. They put it on a scale, as an old scale, as weighed against a feather. And it was heavier than the feather. Then the prisoner wakes up, and he's right. He went back in time. He doesn't know where he is, but where he is in the same prison, and he just feels disoriented. And so this turns into a cycle. Yeah, he ends up dying like 5 times in a row. And Clancy is talking to this bird, and he says, "When's this guy going to get it?" He says, "When's this going to stop?" He says, "This is going to stop when he finally learns." And so each time that he dies, he gets his heart pulled out, and it keeps getting weighed, and it slowly, over the course of time, it stops getting like angry, and it like eventually it just it gets a little more sad, a little more tame. And so each time that he's in this prison, he does this death loop. He gets slowly a little bit less violent each and every time. Like he's like, what's going on here? You know, it's like it's a semi-conscious thing that's kind of going on. And eventually, when he gets his heart dissected or pulled out to get weighed, eventually you see like it's super depressed. It gets super depressed and it like starts crying. It's like, oh my god, please help me. And there's these two entities that take it over to get it weighed. They have eyeballs and they let a teardrop fall out and they water his heart. So
Damn.
After that episode, after that time that he wakes up again, he starts, the weird thing starts happening. He starts seeing his own face in the faces of all the other prisoners, and he's like, holy crap. And he doesn't kill anyone this time in his effort to escape the prison. So the way he actually escapes the prison ends up being, somewhat surprisingly, that he helps other people escape the prison. So like he helps other people escape the prison, and that opens up essentially a path for him to exit the prison as well. So weirdly enough, during this cycle, he helped other people escape. He ends up dying, but when he ends up dying, they take his heart out, and his heart is lighter than the feather. So his heart's lighter than the feather. Then he gets sent back to the prison, but this time he has a tool. He has a tool that essentially just lets him turn back time, and the turning back time lets him escape the prison. And so that's pretty much how the episode ends. In the middle of it, the bird is like guiding him through essentially this process. He doesn't talk. I think it's an Egyptian thing. Egyptian symbolism to have scale with a heart being measured against a feather. I had to specifically look that up because weirdly, the first day that I saw that, I saw a video by a hard rock band. It wasn't like, I would say it's like a more progressive version of like Trivium or something. I forget what they were called.
Okay.
But they had, if only I could remember. But there's a music video of them, and in the music video they use that same symbolism. And I was like, oh wow, like,
Okay.
it felt like one of those weird esoteric moments where you get exposed to something by two different complete mediums at the same time, and it's like a major like religious thing. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not saying I had religious experience. I was like, what? What? Like,
I
think
I hear you, man.
the weird esoteric stuff, now at this point in my life, I'm convinced that it happens like all the time, and we just don't have the wiring to see it. And that could sound like, oh, you're a religious fanatic, but like, no, like if you've been exposed to different experiences, we'll say, like you can very quickly understand how limited your scope of vision is. Like at any one point, like you can only see in one direction. You can not see the other one. You know, there's half the universe that way that you're not seeing right away, not alone, just like the four walls that are, you know, keeping you in here. So that's, although that episode wasn't, I guess, typically Egyptian, but he did go over like some Buddhist concepts there. Was really interesting to ponder, and now I think I have a completely different understanding of the soul, not just in the last, you know, couple months, but probably in the last few years. It's something that's kind of cumulative. One thing I want to mention is the bird is super chill. The bird was a writer of a book, actually. His voice actor was. So he seemed to be, you know, a little bit more into the magic stuff, into a lot of spirituality. His big comment was the doctrine of Buddhism. Essentially, what it's trying to get you to do is trying to get you to understand that anything that you do, any spiritual practice that you do that's trying to get somewhere, might be seen as a waste of time, because what you're doing is nothing that is put before you is anything that actually exists. It's illusory. It's something that appears to be there. It almost appears with certainty, but it's something that's fooling you, because you are a manifestation of essentially something much bigger that you cannot understand. Your molecules came for in a process that is incomprehensible over the course of billions of years. How did the molecules end up in being you? that's crazy. So if there's anything timeless out there, there's, if you think of a spirit, how do you know that you are not the product of something reincarnated? Because when it comes down to it, you might think you're an individual, but if you have all the traits of your personality, whether you enjoy comedy, you're quirky, whatever, there's been someone in history that has had those same qualities. So really, are you a person, or are you an embodiment of those timeless qualities? That's where the illusion aspect. You think you have an identity here on Earth, but you don't. So what the bird was saying was that all of your self-improvements, in one sense, like, they're worthless, but it's not a nihilistic worthless. It's the opposite. It's like, oh, why are you inflicting pain on yourself by thinking that where you are isn't a bad place? Maybe what matters is this moment. It's the only singular timeless moment, and you can try to enjoy that. And if you're not enjoying that, how do you rework your moment into a moment that's enjoyable? So the bird said, essentially, if you recognize the non-essentialism of everything, then what you can do, you can realize that you're in the video game. You're in the video game, right? And he said, your spiritual practice is worthless because you're grinding. You're grinding in World of Warcraft. You need to get off the game. He says, go drink some water, because you've been playing a game and you haven't been realizing it this entire time. So that's why this episode really got me going down that path. And there's so much I could extrapolate from that, I guess, in talking points. But yeah, I don't want to dominate the conversation too much, because I don't know if you have any thoughts.
No, dude, that's interesting shit, man. I love it. Don't worry about dominating, man. That's cool. I like that. When I'm worried about ranting, I'm always like, man, am I going too far? But sometimes when you're ranting, you're on the right path, man. So don't be shy. Don't be shy. That's why we're here. I've never seen the show yet, but like I know Ryan off the grid loves it. Sam Tripoli loves it. I have a couple buddies that love it, and I've heard great things about it, but I just haven't seen it. But you're making me want to check it out for sure, man.
Oh yeah, and it's something you can blow through in like 3 hours. And I think that mindset comes full circle back to, I think, the mindset of someone like Jackson Pollock, who can appreciate the moment, who can appreciate, like, I'm not trying to get anywhere by doing this. And that's why I've been doing more expressionist, like art recently. Like if I do something visual, like that's not something I promote at all. It's just like something therapeutic to me. So with what now I'll plug a little bit. Jackson Pollock has that kind of framework of art, like, okay, this is valid. You can steer your sense of randomness into something that becomes conscious. I've been trying to incorporate that in my musical project into American Time Machine recently, and essentially treating our synthesizers as orchestral tools. So I've been doing a lot of melodic writing where you don't see that in a whole lot of electronic music. You don't see a whole lot of melodic writing. A lot of it's trying to expand the texture of the music and say, how can I make this synth sound this way, which is cool and it's valid. But I'm just trying to take that and take the classical elements that I think that have made music so great in the past and like meld them together. And so when it comes to the randomness aspect, a lot of times I'll either write something in a synthesizer melodically that sounds extremely random, but then, or I'll even use a note randomizer and see what it produces. and I'll try to take the next line. And I'll say, okay, I'll repeat that, and how can I harmonize that? Or I'll add a beat here to that. And eventually, if you do that, you recognize that your brain tries to find patterns and beauty in a lot of things that it hears. So, like, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get that approach into my music as much as possible. So I do incorporate some live instruments here and there, but now it's been so much more focused on, hopefully, on me removing myself from it, because I used to sing like on my music all the time, but like, oh wait, I'm full of myself. I'm not doing something that I think I have a much different perspective on the pure like audible side of it, that I should just take my ego, which is my voice, and just take it out of there. And so now I can just focus on purely the what's the word, the compositional side of it. So now I would be more comfortable like expressing myself as a composer than any had before. And I don't mean that in a pompous way. It's just like, well, I'm focusing more on just the melodic aspect of it, because I think that's a awesome melding that we can draw from, like in terms of like what made music great, in the past 1,000 years versus what made it great right now, or even 2,000, 3,000 years ago, or tribal music. I have a
yeah, man. It all comes from something. Like music, that's a whole fucking conversation on its own. Music, man. Music is such an amazing thing on so many levels, whether it's where it came from and how it formed into so many different levels, just the effect that it has on you physically, mentally. Yeah, music is it's magic in my eyes. It's just pure magic for the most part, in the most positive form. I mean, sure, there's sad music and you can kind of add some arguments to that, but for the most part, yeah, man, music is just wonderful. It's magical.
What's crazy, because it's like art forms are time machines with kinks in them. That's a good way to describe them.
Yeah,
like,
man.
You're putting, like, when you hear
Nice.
like, the full orchestrated version of anything that like Mozart or Beethoven put into an orchestra, you're like, oh wow, this is how they did it then. Obviously there's some criticisms you have there, but like, I'm changing seats with these people that were 300 years ago. That's like wild. That's a wild experience. And textbooks are kind of time machines too, and that's what makes them so incredible in their own way. Because like, wow, someone wrote this down and I can exchange that idea. Like the first time I actually picked up a classic like Great Expectations, and I was like, wow, I understand this, even with the time differential. It's like, wow, it puts you there. It's crazy.
It's cool. That's cool, man.
Yeah. And so, yeah, basically I want I can sound crazy when I do this, but I do think a lot of what I try to write ends up being very fast and wild and sporadic in some ways. And so like I take inspiration from people like Mozart, and I feel like if you try to like write something like Mozart would write, and you put that into the electronic medium and put it into EDM, and still like keep your texture, keep your stuff that you want to do to make make the sound as fat as possible, like I think those are really cool meldings of worlds. And then like, I don't know, in order to get the tribal feel, you just like throw a didgeridoo in there, that I have. I like all of these ideas. These are things I like to try when I can. I would love to own a steel drum, but they're so expensive. That's
cool. Yeah. That's the thing about instruments, man. And I learned that at a young age because I wanted to get into saxophone at the same time as wanting to get into drums and bass guitar all at the same time. So it was like, because like a saxophone can be ridiculous. And I mean, a drum kit, if you want it to sound good, you want quality there for sure. But yeah, no, absolutely, man. And not that he was a musical composer per se, but a director. Just going back to Kubrick, he's such a director that has done such amazing things with music that I feel that, like, honestly, straight up, I feel like if classical music makes a comeback, it's because of Stanley Kubrick. Because I'm hearing the Barry Lyndon theme song. Not that I forget what the actual piece is called. I'm hearing that in insurance ads. I'm hearing the waltz from Eyes Wide Shut in video game. And I get that they're already very classical pieces, but just and I could be totally off the ball on this, but just how his movies have made such a, I don't want to say comeback, because I feel like he's one of those geniuses that never got a fair rap to begin with. But now that he's getting that appreciation, and those songs and that music is out there with his format and in his medium, honestly, I felt so ignorant in so many instances, because I thought, holy shit, I thought that was just a song written for Clockwork Orange, or I thought that was just written for Barry Lyndon. I thought that was written for Barry Lyndon for a long time when I was younger. And then you grow up and you're like, no, he's using these just amazing pieces that are already around. And I'm starting to trail off, but I'm trying to connect your point with what you're saying, and kind of pulling classical music and trying to get some non-traditional instruments in there, like the steel drum and whatnot, right? Because you can create some really interesting music with that, and that's how you create. That's another thing I wanted to get into with Kubrick. That's how you create mood, and that's how you kind of get the audience thinking different ways, and guessing, and wondering, and hoping, and loving, and hating. So, I mean, yeah, I may have taken your point a little on steroids, but
No,
yeah, it's cool stuff, man. It really, really is.
yeah, one thought I had as to why the modern orchestra has kind of been faded a little bit. Well, it's not just because we have so many more mediums of listening to music, but I think it's because the orchestra has kept a tight grip on its association with the upper class rather than being a medium of the people. And when I say that, I'm also meaning to say that I don't think the orchestra, generally speaking, has been as apt to take chances and risks and write music that is revolutionary in a way. I feel like we've been in kind of a stagnant period when it comes to the orchestra and writing in general. Like I specifically try to look to seek out the weirdos in writing to see if there's something that really grabs you, that's out there. And it's like during the time of Beethoven and Mozart and Bach, like they captivated people. That was
Yeah, they were the weirdos, right? Like, yeah. It's always the weirdos that all of a sudden you go, oh, wait a minute. They're not weirdos. They're fucking geniuses. I get it now, right?
Yeah, but if those people are out there, I don't think we've brought them to the front of the of the music world, or even in the orchestra.
Sure,
I saw.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't think they've been put out there. Anything. I can't even, like, I remember some orchestrated themes from music. Like, obviously, most people remember what Star Wars sounds like. It's become a cultural thing.
Yeah. Pink Panther, baby. That's one of my favorites. Pink Panther.
Yeah,
Pink Panther
but so those are the big themes that we remember from orchestrated music. It has nothing to do with going down into the orchestra and actually listening to a 15-minute symphony.
Yeah. Fantasia was huge with orchestra. I forget his name, but he had it. Disney brought in a very famous guy to do that. I forget his name, but yeah, that was huge. That was a huge thing at the time.
Yeah, like right now, if you try to think of like your top 5 favorite orchestrated songs or classical, like you could just do a couple lines like bum 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 bum, and instantly you know what I'm talking about.
Dude, I would literally be like the intro to Eyes Wide Shut. I would literally like list Kubrick movies because that's where
Yeah.
I get most of my, like, I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of not, because I fucking love what he's done with. I love him. I love Kubrick. Everyone on the show knows I love Kubrick, so I'm just sucking on the Kubrick teat. So
Yeah, I get there's been some interesting examples of really experimental stuff that I've really enjoyed. Like over the past century,
Sure,
one
man.
guy, he orchestrated a song. I forget what it's called precisely, but he tried to mimic the experience of getting on a steam train. And so
Okay.
the beginning sound with, I think, light violins and a whole lot of wind section that he tries to pitch so it sounds like a train whistle, and you're like, oh my gosh,
shit,
it was
okay.
good. Yeah, like he actually does a good job, and you're like, what?
That's interesting.
I feel like there's less people out there taking chances like that.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
I think that was probably around the 1940s. Like I've listened to some Stravinsky, and honestly, probably my favorite composer was Bach. And yeah, like the dude just found so much. Like, and one thing I got on a big kick over the use of inversion in music. And inversion, there are multiple senses of the term inversion in music, because obviously most of the time it means you invert the notes, but there's a lot of ways that you do that. Like if you invert just like a singular note on a bass line, that's very common practice, like in the jazz scene. That's very common practice in a lot of classical music. I think Bach, what he liked to do was take the entirety of a melody and play around with inverting some of those parts and doing some harmonies over that. And I'm like, when I started really paying attention, I was like, wow, that is not being used very much. I sent emails to one of the professors at Penn State here to inquire about the topic, and he gave me some examples. And the examples of where you see that phenomena in classical music is very, very far and few between. One of the examples he gave me was the Lamb, which is a choral. I'm terrible at words, but that's for, yeah. It was for, I don't know what it's for. It sounded like it's done for church services, but that is one song that uses full melodic inversion, and it gives you this very creepy, eerie sound, but does have those pleasant interactions in it. So I pretty much took what happened in that song, just took it to the extreme with really, really long lines of notes. Yeah, it was really interesting. So I ended up writing a lot based off of that. A lot of that theory involved with doing those techniques is called counterpoint. So I've been writing a ton from the stance of counterpoint and trying to incorporate that nifty little technique in a lot of my writing in general, and a lot of my synthesizers. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take the melody, then take the melody into another track, and then for that melody, for the harmony, I'll invert that melody, and then you can either do inversion over its axis, or you can invert the note intervals. There's actually two ways that you can do it, and they produce pretty different sounds. So I'll do one or the other, and then sometimes I'll move the scale up and down on one to see what kind of harmonies I can produce out of that. And that sounds great in many cases on its own, but then you can say like, oh, I'll adjust the note here and adjust the note there. That's a lot of what you can do there. So if you listen to the last album, that's something I go a lot heavier on, but that's something I incorporate more now. The newest thing that I'm going to try, I'm going to have something come out on the 15th this month, and that'll be a group of 2 to 4 minute songs, and there'll be, but it's using a lot of those writing concepts. And what I'm doing after this, now I'm graduating into like 15-minute songs. That's what's going to be, and it's going to be
cool. Okay.
all lyricless, and it's going to try to have a sort of electronic orchestral feel to it. So, but it's going to be the influences, like you're going to hear some trap beat sounds like layered into that, and I'm going to try to have it like essentially be in different movements. It's going to be one of my more ambitious ones. But yeah.
Have you heard of Mark Devlin?
Maybe. But,
Maybe? Okay.
Okay.
We'll talk. We'll talk about him and another band. Like funk music?
Oh, funk is my thing. Well, I don't play a lot of funk. I wish I could play bass so I could play awesome funk songs.
But you like funk?
Oh yeah, I love John Frusciante. He was like,
okay.
When I had idols, he was one of them.
All right, you know what we'll do? We'll talk about Mark Devlin, but I'm gonna show you. Shout out to Canadian band 5 Alarm Funk. They're literally one of my favorite all-time bands. I just had all their CDs out. I don't know where I put them, but I'm gonna hook you up with them so you could listen to them. I'd love to try to get Teo or someone from the band on to the show so the three of us can talk, or if I can get a few of them on to talk, because I think there's some cool conversations here that I think we can have. And another person that I'd like to bring on, I've done 3 episodes with her so far, Aurora. I don't know if you're familiar with Aurora, but I'll send you the episodes of hers and ours to check out, because she does music too. And I think it's kind of in the realm of more instrumental, and I don't know what you would call it, but kind of longer term, like you said you were going to get into like kind of 10-15 minute interval songs. So I think she does some of that longer stuff as well. So I think that there's a few people there that I'd love to try to gather in for us to talk to. But before we actually go, can you tell us, I know we've been talking about it a little bit, but is there any of your new stuff, or do you want to talk a little bit about your music and your band a little bit about before we go? Again, I apologize for cutting it a little shorter than we planned, but definitely it's not going to be the last time. But I still want you to speak your piece, man. I want you to talk about what you want to share.
All right.
And take your time. That's why I wanted to leave you some time to talk about so don't rush.
All right. First, I want to say we've been conditioned to think that the dragons have to fight each other. They don't. Going beyond that, we also have been bred to think, we're so like brainwashed into thinking everything is a competition that we've thought that way of our economic systems. Like, which is better, capitalism or communism? You decide. And it's like, no. Like, maybe you just need to like modify what you have until you have something that works. And it's like, whoa,
love it.
Yeah, it's crazy,
dude. I'm writing this shit down because these are next time on Divulgence. This is next time. So keep going, because I'm writing this shit down. This is great.
Oh, that's one point of interest I think that my life has taught me, I guess. Sorry. And when if you listen, I mean, I've gone through different phases of what I was going for with my music, but if you like what I talked about today, I would say listen to my most recent album called The Antidemon. I've done I think part of my work is supposed to be a little bit comedic, so I think the fact that I have such a high volume of like works out there, it kind of adds to that comedic aspect of it, because like some of it isn't serious, but the more I do it, the more it looks weird, and I don't know what's going on in hindsight. You know what I mean? It's like
all about learning, man. It's all about learning, and it sounds like you're into experimenting, so that's cool. That's really cool.
Oh, yeah. That's, if I had any advantages, I think it would be that I'm not afraid to try something different. And sometimes you get mixed quality when you do that, but I try to upload stuff only that I would like enjoy listening to. I think I've gotten to the point in my life where I've listened to so much music, it becomes harder to find things that appeal to you. And so you just have to create something that feels like it's carving out that itch in your brain, you know? So that's mostly my medium. That's mostly my way form of expression or something that gives me a lot of personal meaning in my life, and why I've gotten to the point where like I enjoy coming on these shows, of course, and I enjoy talking about it with people, but like the validation doesn't really come from the size of my audience at this point. So I'm able to get some time with it, and it feels really good. Sorry, I'm trying to get to. I haven't released any writing yet. I don't write very much. I've probably written only like 50,000 words of
Like lyrics,
anything.
or is this like poetry, or
Not lyrics. What I've been jotting down is like I have been reading more philosophical works over the
manifesto
past.
kind of stuff, or
I guess. Well, like I'm writing. You know how like if you read any Nietzsche, I've read like half of one of his books, but
okay,
he writes in like 2-page segments, and it's almost like a little bit
okay,
journalist.
gotcha.
Uh,
I know exactly what you mean now. Okay, yeah, yes.
that's kind of if I feel like I have an idea that I haven't like heard. Well, not necessarily an original idea, but maybe not necessarily put in the words I have. Yeah, I have heard other people say. I try to write it down and not present it as if it's been necessarily original, but like something that I think
I
might be important to address. And like I've I'm trying.
We think so similar, dude. Like, there's been so many times. Sorry to cut you off. There's been so many times where I want to cut you off because I'm like, holy shit, man, I think the same way. But yeah,
Yeah,
like when I hear things, I'm like, okay, I want to put it in a way that I like how it sounds, so that I can, because I like to know about things and why things and how things, and so if I like to learn it so I can do it, so I can teach it, so that they can do it properly too. So I like to know. I like to be able to, like, put it in my mind, and okay, is this how it means, and just kind of like what you're saying, and kind of take different meanings and forming. And I could be yapping, and I apologize, but that's kind of what I was getting from what you were saying.
yeah. And I don't. Identity is a weird thing. Like it's hard to cling to, but so like for example, I wrote down anarchy. Every hierarchy that is worth keeping can withstand scrutiny, and we are not scrutinizing our hierarchies. And that's probably a good definition of what anarchy can function as. Because I think, yeah, that's a whole other conversation too. But if I had to be
Sure.
closest to anything politically, I would be an anarchist. I talk about some things like that, and I try not to overdo it because when I think of people like Aleister Crowley, who really, it seems like he just wrote so much material because he was up his own butt. So you have to
Yeah, and he was copy. I felt like he was copy. Let's take a little
yeah,
bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this, and who's ever smoking enough butt hash is gonna buy into it, right? So, yeah.
yeah. Oh, and I had this thought relative to what we were talking about today: Buddhism and simulations. If Buddhist doctrine stipulates non-essentialism as a part of existence, following
Okay.
this, one could assume that the desire to engage in virtual reality is an ironic delve from one simulation into another. So it's like,
Yes, yeah, man.
wow, it's like how much of a hellscape are we in, or do we think that we're in, that we have to go from one simulation to the other? It's kind of wild to think about. It kind of just having that thought made me want to quit video games forever. But it, I still haven't. But it was like whoa,
Just the
it's weird
thought
to
of
think.
it, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. Like, why would we want to be in another reality so bad? It might be, yeah, we're taking this one a little bit too seriously.
Yeah, for sure, man, for sure. Sorry, I was hoping we'd go for at least like an hour and a half, but this was great, man. Thanks for giving me your time. I wrote down a lot of stuff that I'd like to get back into, and I've wrote down a little list of people that I'd kind of like to try to gather us together with. And I think there's some cool conversations to be had there. So, is there anything else you want to share with the viewers before we kick it out of here, my friend?
Yeah, the world hears your prayers, even if you don't think they do.
Right on, man. Beautiful, beautiful words, Kurt.
In the matter around you.
I love it, man. Kurt, thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll talk soon, my friend. Okay?
I'll talk to you soon.
I will, man. Peace and love. Nothing but that.
Yeah.
Peace.